President, with the carrier yield to a question?
Madam President.
Do you yield to a question, Senator?
Madam President, this carrier will yield to a question from Senator Manning.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. I've noticed on here, and my colleague raised a question a little earlier today regarding the children. I was wondering whether or not the 4-year-olds and the 5-year-olds were consulted during the drafting of this amendment for this bill.
Madam President, to the esteemed senator from Lane County, whose district does not represent any of Douglas County, for the record. I've just noticed that from history. I do not believe that minors were consulted as when Legislative Council was considering the draft, but hopefully, Madam President, the children that would be covered through these adoption agencies would definitely would benefit from this change.
Senator Denbrough.
Thank you, Madam President. A question to the carrier, please.
Does the senator yield to a question?
Madam President, yes.
He so does.
Thank you, Madam President. Good freshman colleague, you represent the district that includes Lake Oswego and Tualatin and parts of southwest Portland, as I understand it. Of your constituents, do you know how many of those constituents are licensed certified public accountants? I would assume, Madam Chair, I would assume there are very many who reside in that district.
Madam President, in response to the question, I do know that I do not know the number of residents who have a CPA, but I do know that 3 adoption agencies that are mentioned in this legislation are actually within the Senate District 19, which I represent.
Thank you. Further question to the carrier?
Does the senator yield to another question?
Madam President, yes.
Please proceed.
Yes, I appreciate that there are 3 adoption agencies, and you know, when I was first encouraged to run for the Senate and was given my initial advice, I was told to really look out for the interests of my district. And I fully respect your desire to look out for those 3 adoption agencies. But I would venture that there are many more CPAs than adoption agencies in your district. So I'm wondering if you have calculated the fiscal impact of the loss of business that is attendant to this bill on many of your constituents.
Madam President, in response to the follow-up question from the good senator from North and Northeast Portland, I would hazard that the loss of benefit to the CPAs, even those that live within the bounds of my Senate district, would not necessarily outweigh the public's best interest to have financial accountability and money well spent by this state. So I would think that the taxpayers would probably appreciate a little bit more financial prudence as it relates to this sort of technical fix.
Madam President, one final question.
Does the senator yield to a final question?
Madam President, yes.
Please proceed.
Good freshman senator, please take this in the best of spirits, but why do you hate CPAs?
Madam President, the carrier of this measure does not hate CPAs.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Burdick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the carrier yield to a question?
Will the carrier yield to another question?
Madam President, yes.
He will.
Thank you, Madam President. I am really alarmed by this bill. It looks like a simple bureaucratic thing, but when you look at it more carefully, it's just plainly evident that we're proposing to remove a protection against child trafficking in this bill. what protection is there from child trafficking if they don't have to submit financial statements that are reviewed by a certified public accountant?
Madam President, I appreciate the good majority leader's question. However, that question did not surface in the course of testimony in committee. It'd be something that I'm certain that the agency might be able to research for us as it relates to the more technical aspects of the bill.
Madam President, with all due deference to my colleague, I am very frightened that this bill will cause devastating impacts on our child adoption agencies, and I urge a no vote.
Senator Roblin?
Thank you, Madam President. Question of the carrier.
Does the carrier yield to a question?
Madam President, yes.
He does.
So I'm confused about one of your answers to our good senator from the Eugene area and Lane County, in that all of a sudden, last year we had a big contention about gold mining, and I do mining in my district as well, and you brought up miners. And so I'm wanting to say, are you trying to get mining engaged in having CPAs look into their practices? And I just didn't understand the answer to your question.
Madam President, in response to the good senator from the South and Central Coast, I don't believe that's germane to the legislation that's being considered before this chamber today, but it would be something that, should the bill make it through, perhaps on the House side we could have some testimony from miners as it relates to miners.
Follow up?
Does carrier yield to another question?
Madam President, yes.
So you didn't mean minors when you were saying minors earlier, as opposed to children or other kinds of things? You were using it in a different term than I was interpreting the understanding of how you were trying to rope in a really good industry in our state.
Madam President, in response to the good senator's question, yes, I did mean minors being individuals that are under the age of 18 or 21? 18. Not those who work in the natural resource extraction business.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, does the senator wish to close?
Yes. Is it this time? Okay. My fellow senators, I appreciate the attention to detail you bring to the work of this chamber as we seek legislative perfection in the Oregon revised statutes. Too often in this building and across this country, technical fixes to the law are ignored. They're thrown asunder. They're dismissed. And the lack of attention we all know that they deserve. Through our conversation today, I'm reminded of one of my favorite philosophers, Anaximenes of Miletus, who posited in the 5th century BC the doctrine that air is the source of all things. And I believe through our discourse today, 3,000 years after its rendering, that we have proven a corollary to his theory. Hot air is the source of all Oregon legislation. I would ask you not to think of Senate Bill 1525, not in its limited capacity as it impacts my constituents from Lake Oswego, Westland, Tualatin, and Southwest Portland, trademark Senate District 19, but to think of this bill as the Legislative Fix Act for the 21st century, and not just on the impact for my constituents or your constituents, but for the state of Oregon, from the 800,000 acres of wheat fields in the Mountain Time Zone near Idaho, to the Dungeness crab and setting sun and sea foam from the Oregon coast. Senate Bill 1525 doesn't just provide a technical fix for 21 entities that got caught up in unnecessarily burdensome regulation. No. It is simply the next logical step in our evolution towards statutory perfection. In the annals of Oregon history, there are certain moments that define our constitutional democracy: the beach bill, the bottle bill, the initiative, and the referendum. The legislative fix bill for the 21st Century Act is not just for Oregon, my Oregon. It's not just for Oregon, your Oregon. It is for Oregon, our Oregon. When you cast your vote today, I will ask you, how will you be remembered? With that, Madam President and my fellow members, I ask for your support for Senate Bill 1525.
The question now arises upon third reading and final passage of Senate Bill 1525. Those of the opinion the bill should be passed will answer aye as their names are called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will call the roll.
Byer. Boquist. Burdick. DeBoer. Dembro. Frederick. Gelser. Girard. Hansel. Hass. Johnson. Knope. Cruz. Linthicum. Manning. Monis Anderson. Monroe. Olson. Brzezinski. Riley. Roblin. Steiner Hayward. Taylor. Thatcher. Thatcher. Thompson. Wagner. Winters. Baird Sugar. Baird Sugar. Vance. President Courtney. Excused, Cruz, Riley, Thatcher, Thompson, Winters. Voting no, Baird Sugar, Bentz, Byer, Boquist, Burdick, Dembro, Frederick, Gelser, Girard, Hansel, Hass, Johnson, Knope, Linthicum, Manning.
Monroe. Steiner Hayward. Okay.
Excused, Cruz, Riley, Thatcher, Thompson, Winters. 25 aye votes.
Senate Bill 1525, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the bill.